All right, I'm excited for this. So, very different pace. This is more of a panel. And more importantly, here are two guys here, both have experiences building in the EVM using FHE. So today, this panel is really about the use cases, right? What can you build with FHE within the EVM? So maybe just to start, maybe we can start with some introductions. So would you like to introduce yourself and then maybe your company, what your company is working on?
Hey, yeah, I'm Kyle. I'm the DevRel of Phoenix. Kind of just working on developer onboarding, building with FHE projects, yeah, stuff like that.
Yep. So I'm the co-founder of Encipher, which is like building DeFi app chain over Bitcoin right now. And we are experimenting with a bunch of interesting DeFi applications that can be built using FHE EVM. Like it's EVM compatible, so we can basically onboard any application that's there in the future with the EVM as well. So, yep.
Yeah, so maybe we'll start with you, Rishabh. So you are building essentially like an FHE product on top of Bitcoin. So kind of curious to know like what's kind of like the demand side on Bitcoin regarding FHE or just privacy, private compute in general.
Yeah, so actually the demand of privacy is more on Bitcoin, I guess, as when we did the user analysis or talked to a bunch of folks, I realized that Ethereum folks or basically other ecosystems apart from Bitcoin are not that much concerned about privacy. And we have seen this in Bitcoin as well, right? Like from the initial times, there have been several efforts on bringing on privacy, either on top of Bitcoin or using a similar architecture to Bitcoin like Zcash, Monero. There were several efforts. So there are efforts on Bitcoin as well, like Wasabi Wallet is trying to do that and some other efforts. But because of some reasons, like I guess compliance and UX complications, there have not been some breakout applications. And with programmability and BTC DeFi also picking up, and EVM building on EVM and deploying, basically having the Bitcoin security enables us to have privacy over using your Bitcoin in DeFi applications. So that was something which was very intriguing to me, and I thought users do want it, especially the whales, and we have a lot of them on the Bitcoin ecosystem. So yeah, that was something very insightful to me. So that's why we decided to bring that kind of private shared state through FHE on Bitcoin. Yeah.
So there are, I guess, like Bitcoin rollups nowadays, right? Like, so what you're building, how is that different from another Bitcoin rollup?
Yeah, so we will not be a generalized execution environment. Like starting, we will be having specific applications, and these applications we will be thinking like as there will be co-processors, right? So we can have these applications over like other rollups as well, so that we can have liquidity on existing and over them also. So like we don't want to be a generalized play for the rollups because then it's a different game and you're not solving for privacy in that game. So we are trying to build specific applications which users want right now and trying to scale from that.
We can, I guess, yeah, just to follow up on that, like what is a application that users on Bitcoin are demanding today?
So the most demand that I have heard from you while talking to users was just using the Bitcoin for staking. Like a simple use case is they don't want it to be a fancy perp dex, so to trade it to or restaking or some other kind of layer 2 like DeFi 2.0 applications. It can be a very simple staking one. They get on board a very simple UI. They use their Bitcoin to earn simple yields. So that was one of the major things that I have heard while talking to the users.
Okay, great. I guess, Cal, so what kind of demand do you see on the FHE rollup side?
Yeah, I think when you think about the roll-up specific stuff, there's going to be people that are kind of really invested in the Ethereum ecosystem. So I think like whether it's compatibility or marketing, I think it's good to kind of keep that general ethos. Application specific, I think a lot of it is like DeFi. I think people still want to follow where the money is. People like gambling, people like doing something that they're already kind of used to. Maybe they can use it for extra purposes. But I think probably off the top of my head, lending. Lending is pretty big. I see a lot of demand for some sort of swaps I think, if you use kind of like the FHE VM structure, where if you have like an address mapping to something private, that within itself, I think, does solve some problems. I do hear a little bit of people when you talk about the difference of like confidentiality or anonymity. I think that's another thing to be explored. But yeah, I mean, there's also pretty interesting things being built, such as like gaming or maybe more social stuff. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what people end up being curious to build.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, what I see is maybe three big buckets. One is DeFi, the other one is maybe identity, and then the third one is gaming. So maybe we can chat more about each of these different verticals, and then what we've seen people try and build. Maybe we'll start with DeFi. So since you started with lending, can you maybe talk about what existing pain points are there around lending that we have, let's say, with Aave Compound, and then what can FHE help here solve here?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think when it comes to lending, a lot of times if you think of the real world, you don't necessarily want to know, you don't want people to know like how much you're borrowing, how long your duration is, what interest rate you're getting. This could have a tax, a lot of vulnerabilities. So I think, especially with DeFi, it's good to like encrypt the state. When people talk about like private DeFi, I think a lot of the times people are talking about execution. Mostly maybe from the perspective of like MEV. But I think if you want truly like a really like a dark private system, you would probably have to be from like token generation to value accrual to some sort of like, I guess, exchange for a good or service. So specifically for lending, I think, some approaches are maybe taking like Aave or Compound, like you were saying, and, trying to encrypt the state, certain aspects of it. So I think you really have to look at your function or like the contract logic of how you're trying to store state, how people want to be able to see things. So I think starting one function at a time and constructing the state that way, such as like borrowing, lending. I think certain calculations can get tricky depending on how you want to do it. Just for example, if they have an inherited library that uses something like tick math, for example, or something more low level. That can be pretty difficult, I think, to try to integrate over. So, I think that applies to things like a V2 AMM clone, for example, like doing a XYK invariant might be a little easier, although like then you run into, how you have to do division, for example, in that case, which, could have issues with bit length. If the operations just are too computationally infeasible, that could be a certain issue because then you're kind of requesting users, developers to work with a certain like decimal size that they might not be used to for those that have worked in like the general ERC20 space. So I think that's something to overcome. I also think there's creative solutions such as using different approaches to like liquidity concentration even. Because that within itself is traditionally if you were to fork like V3, right, that would be difficult just because of the libraries that would be inherited.
Yeah, I guess on lending side, maybe just start with lending.
Yeah. So with lending, I guess I don't believe that I agree with the that complete privacy is not important. Like it's not required. Also, like we will have parts of privacy in different parts of the architecture. So that is something which I agree. And with lending, I've seen that the total lending market is also 5 times larger than the borrowing market. So, and people like bigger whales, when they try to use these applications, there's a lot of noise. So they do want, or basically, they do want some kind of privacy that there should not be, a lot of applications or bots trying to track them down and see what's going on with them. So yeah, while talking to the users, this was validated, and that's how we are trying to build a primitive, which is using these DeFi 1.0 applications and from the ground up introducing privacy primitives inside the architecture, and not making everything private because there will be liquidations which cannot be made private at first. Maybe we'll be having an auction kind of mechanism over there and different kinds of to have that process. But we need to start somewhere. And with private lending, I think is the best. Like it's the best use case for bigger whales, so that they can earn yield also and put their assets to use.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think one interesting pain point to solve is today if you're borrowing from Aave or Compound, your liquidation like threshold is all public, right? And there has been cases in the past where people will manipulate the price, right? Pump the price a little bit or dump the price a little bit, and then get some kind of whale liquidated, right? And so I guess like in terms of private lending, it could be very interesting to at least hide your liquidation threshold to protect you from some of these attacks. But then obviously there are constraints around how do you design around being able to liquidate, right? And yeah, I guess like on that front, have you guys seen any teams or ideas around how to design around this problem?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Highlighting like this specific attack vector. I think part of it is like if you have your liquidation ratio, you kind of traditionally you need something to sort of check to make sure that it hasn't been like triggered. I do think that can be tricky, just in the sense where it's like figuring out like how are you going to actually implement that logic. I think it is still a work in progress as far as I've seen. Especially where do you end up getting these like price codes specifically. So it could, in that aspect, maybe be dependent on like some other sort of protocol. I think one way you could do it is if it's like the contract logic will have like, if a certain requirement is met, and you encrypt that, and then maybe you pull from like a different pool somewhere that you're getting the price quote. And then from there, you would compare them like homomorphically without necessarily having to leak that information. I think another thing that could be tricky, depending on how you're engineering suppose like the view functions of the contract as well, could be something to be aware of, because that itself could leak information. But on the other hand, you sort of need users to be able to figure out what interest rate they're going to get for what duration. So I think that there probably will be trade-offs, at least design constraints. But I do think that's one of the interesting things about being in the FHE space, is that a lot of it is just new. Like these solutions, we can talk about it and like theorize, but it'll be pretty cool to see what gets implemented.
Yeah, and I guess like what's another really interesting primitive is really around trading, right? So once you have a confidential ERC20, people will want to trade them, right? I guess Rishabh, you guys worked on a on-chain DEX or private MM. Do you want to describe a little bit more about kind of like what you guys have worked on?
Yeah, so like right now we are trying to construct a solution which basically is like we have taken inspiration from a lot of previous work that has been already done. There were some efforts from Zama as well. There were some efforts from Penumbra. Like there are constructions where different parts of this architecture can be made private. So there are 2-3 kinds of privacy which users can have over here. And like using differential privacy at the layer on the top, we can have privacy for the transaction data that's being provided, interacting on chain, and inserting privacy inside the protocol level, or basically the smart contract level. We can introduce saving of MEV leakages. That is something which we are exploring right now, and how it can be made more performant enough. So these two aspects is something which we need to still, like we are benchmarking them and seeing what really does the user need. Because when you are making existing platforms private, you cannot make the smart contracts change. And then you need to have a layer on top. Basically, traditional privacy will come over there. And with our architecture, as if we are able to build it from the ground up, then we can have saving MEV leakages also for the end users. So these are the two ideas that we are trying to play around in the DEX architecture that we are, designing in-house.
Yeah, if I recall, is that that example, kind of like Penumbra and the Zama implementation, is like it's sort of attempting to solve the issue with like the execution of the trade, right? If I'm recalling, like you're sort of batching them before, and then once they're sort of like you have this batch execution, and then you're executing them, but then you're decrypting, right? Because then the pool balances would be public.
Yeah. So go.
No, is that accurate? Like after the execution, the pool balance itself would be, I guess, in plain text.
Yeah, the pool balance will be in plain text, but in batch execution, that we can have a single smart contract, or basically the central entity which interacts with the pool, and the individual balances will not be revealed, right, up to a certain probability. You can say that, yeah, this was the main balance that interacted with the pool, but we can have 100 participants participate in a trade, and you cannot tell with certainty and that, yeah, you interacted with this much amount on chain. And also, like, encrypted ERC20 will play a very important role over here. Like, we all need them so that users are not able to, expose their, like, that's the first step that will come for the user when the user basically changes their normal USDC or USDT or any asset to encrypted version that basically hides that balance, and then it translates into the differential privacy that comes later on.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think if we look at the history of how Web3 DeFi unfolded, right? So you have something like an ERC20 standard. I forgot which year it came. It might have been 2017. I think it first came out. And then later on, you have folks like Uniswap, building AMM on top of it, or borrowing lending. Later on, we saw the ERC 721 standard for NFTs come out, right? And then later on, you have things like OpenSea that was able to build on top of it and really try to get NFTs massively adopted, right? And now we have NFT lending. We have all sorts of derivative built on top. So yeah, I agree. I would say like confidential ERC20 is the first step. It's almost like step 0 in order to build anything on top, right? Yeah. And so it is quite a bit of a green space, design space, right? For having people to figure out novel mechanics to avoid information leakage, right? We talk about differential privacy. And yeah, I would agree with what you guys said. I think, yeah, if I remember correctly, Penumbra was using FHE for batching the orders to prevent information leakage, which I think does make sense. And I think the downside potentially, or the challenge, is that you do need enough volume in order for this to make sense. Yeah. If you're the only person swapping, then yeah, like it's gonna be pretty obvious, right? Yeah. Maybe just to shift a little bit around. So let's talk about gaming. We've all done hosted hackathons here. It's very obvious that a lot of people love building games just by default. Yeah, just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I've not experimented a lot of, maybe you can share more insights on that. You have some gaming protocols. But yeah, I have worked on private games earlier. Like I worked, like our team basically worked with Polygon Maiden in the past, and which is like a privacy layer on Ethereum right now, part of the Polygon Zero stack. And we build basically poker over there, which is like one of the biggest use cases for privacy on-chain games. And the major thing is that where assets are getting involved and strategies are getting involved, then you need to have some privacy on the on-chain level. And so that was the major motivation that we, decided to build poker on-chain games for them. But yeah, would love to know regarding games from you.
Yeah, my perspective on games is that I actually grew up playing video games, and I think when I first came to Web3, it was very obvious to me that, okay, everything's transparent. So in my mind, it was like, most games are not possible, right? Most games that are actually fun, like if you think about even the basic Pokemon game, where your Pokemon monsters actually have their own stats, you have to select a move in a hidden fashion, because else the adversary can have a faster move, right, to front run you or block your attack, right? So a lot of these little game elements are missing in crypto, and these are game elements, in my opinion, are so crucial because they are the elements that makes the game fun, right? More challenging. You need to be able to hide certain stats, certain strategies. In the case of poker, it's a bluffing game. It wouldn't make sense not hiding the cards, right? So yeah, personally, I like gaming. I think there will be a really fun Dark Forest type of game that's fully on-chain, which, the blockchain itself is a really good platform for anything MMO, right? And you can imagine thousands or millions of people playing at the same time using this share layer. And yeah, I'm bullish on gaming. And so we've hosted quite a bit of hackathons. I think by default, people like building games because it's easier to build than DeFi. I think most people, if they understand kind of like the Web2 logic of, let's say, poker or a different game, they can sort of replicate this very quickly using FHE because the form factor is Solidity and it's just easier to directly code, right? Yeah, like last time, I think one game that I really liked was someone built a fully on-chain Risk. So it's a board game Risk where you have your army across different countries, and you can only see your enemies if you're nearby their border. So let's say I'm in France, then I can see, like, let's say Spain, right? And you need something like FHE or some other encryption-based system to hide information, and it becomes a lot more fun and strategic once you are able to hide information on chain. So that's my perspective on gaming.
Yeah, I think that was well said. Yeah, for some lore, actually, before I started working at Phoenix, even my first introduction to FHE was building Mafia with Remy, and to me that was like a pretty good, I guess, intro into building with FHE, just because you kind of see the concepts of how it'd be difficult to handle the shared state and permissions for different users. So I think it's a good way to wrap your head around. Yeah, I like the dark forest thing too. I think when you add in, similar to the risk, like you have a radius-based thing where you can actually like kind of change the game state versus it having to be like binary, did you pass or not? Adds a lot of options, and also for like large-scale gaming too. I think the non-interactive aspect of FHE also makes it so you could make some more of like a global game versus having to, even if you use something else to handle compose the shared state, like maybe some sort of like secret sharing, it would still be, maybe a little bit trickier to like add or have people add or leave the game in terms of like how you would handle the state of it all. So I do think gaming is, Web3 gaming, I guess, is its own bottle of worms, but can of worms or whatever. But yeah, I think it's definitely a use case.
I really wanted to know regarding the performance that you had because you were building a poker game with Inco, right? So would love to know any numbers that you have if you with the poker that was built on Inco.
Yeah, poker, generally speaking, is okay and easier to build because you really just need 9 cards. So here's the thing. When you build fully on-chain poker, you can't have more than 2 players. And the reason why is you don't know if you're playing against people who are colluding, right? So what we have in poker is something more like a heads up where it's 1 versus 1. And so therefore you only need 2 cards per person plus the 5 cards in the middle, right? And so in that case, yeah, if you want to use FHE to generate random cards, it's actually okay in terms of cost. But if you want to build a game, let's say a fully on-chain Yu-Gi-Oh game, this is where you probably want to have a different primitive. It doesn't have to be FHE based. So for example, for us, we'd be thinking about TEs as well to be complementary to FHE. And obviously there are different security assumptions trade-offs here, but for things like where you do need, let's say, larger scale shuffling or randomness, then it could be a good source alternative. Yeah.
Got it.
And I guess like from talking to developers, users, what are some interesting learnings that you've gotten? A lot of times people, when they first try to build using FHE, everything is completely new. What are some maybe pitfalls or things that people usually realize very quickly? Any insights or lessons here?
Yeah, I think we still need to educate a lot in terms of the stack that we are building. We need to make it more DevX friendly. The developers that I talk to are right now, most of them are having no idea about FHE. They still think it's a competition of ZK, and it's similar to ZK. So I have to explain them like this is not something which is like a competition, but basically can be used with ZK also, and if possible, if you want, you can use in place of ZK. So we still need a lot of need to do some education in those regards, and while building also like the tooling around FHE VM still needs to be developed a lot. Like we are talking to a lot of FHE VM developers also, so that we can make it easy for application developers to build applications, and maybe with the co-processors you guys releasing, that will become more easy in the future. So yeah, the developers still feel that there is a gap between what's being sold and what's getting used at the end. So we need to bridge that gap, I think, and we are trying our bit so that we can educate them, bring them on board, and get them FHE build. Like yeah. So as it was done, like we need to learn from the 2020 or 2021 ZK fiasco that happened. Like everyone got ZK build like in 2022, 2023. So we need that level of education and that level of hype in those terms. So yeah.
Yeah, I think another thing that you talk to developer about, like, hey, this is what FHE can do, and a lot of times they are looking at it from the perspective of ZK, which I think does make sense, especially because it's more mature, especially in this space. So they're probably thinking like it's often like, but how is this verified? Where am I storing this? And a lot of it is kind of different. I think also it's kind of like a lot of it is like the naming that's used, right? Because people talk about like, hey, this is ZK VM. And a lot of time that has more to do with like the verification of it versus like the actual, I guess, in some cases like the precompiles that you have for like using FHE. But it's, you gotta, let them know that it's like, it's just Solidity, it's Solidity native. So like you can use things like Remix or Hard Hat or maybe even like Foundry mock operations, for example, to build out whatever project you want. You don't have to go through a lot of different steps. It's kind of just, I think something that like I've tried using recently is like trying to talk to them like from the perspective of just like a normal EVM Solidity developer and be like, how you had like a uint 8 or uint 16 on your contract, except it's just a little different now because now you have like an euint 8. Instead of the same way that you could use it for adding or subtracting or multiplication in your contract logic, or use it as a value in a key mapping pair. In this case, basically, it's the same. It's very similar. It's just like if someone were to query the contract or try to sniff what was going on, they would just basically hit a wall of ciphertext that would be basically useless information. So I think a lot of it is just kind of trying to put it in the perspective that they're already familiar with, because like FHE can sound very daunting. So, but yeah, it's just kind of the education of it's not too different from what they're used to building.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Based on my experience talking to developers, it has been surprisingly easy to explain what it does, right? Because I would say the reason why is because FHE is just ciphertext, right? And then you can represent a ciphertext inside of EVM as an encrypted state. So therefore, if you're a Solidity developer, like you say, it's just the EUINT for an encrypted integer or EBOOL for encrypted Boolean. And so it reads and writes very basically like very seamlessly like normal Solidity, right? And then on top of it, you can just add, divide, multiply, you can just do operations. So the part that I found maybe that was a little bit more unique and you had to explain is when you build logic in computational compute, you cannot use if-else statements because that would leak information about the underlying encrypted data, right? So there are ways in FHE where you can still write conditional logic over encrypted data using something called conditional multiplexer, so CMUX or select. And so I think that's the little twist that typically does take, I would say, at least 5 minutes to explain. But for folks who are familiar with this idea of like ternary in JavaScript or something similar to that, usually they get it pretty quickly. I think that's probably the biggest difference. Other than that, yeah, like similar tooling I think helps a lot, just using Solidity language and then MetaMask, Hard Hat, Remix. I think that has been pretty helpful in general.
Yeah, I try to think of it's like you're saying with the with the multiplexer, it's kind of like there's conditional assignment but not conditional write. Because it'll either be because it'll either go A or B. Just so yeah, I feel that the mind shift or the context switching of like almost working with like constant time code is can be a big caveat with working with FHE.
Yeah, I was just mentioning regarding the access issues also right now with the FHE VM. Like we need to give access to all the contracts that need to interact with that particular state. So that becomes a little redundant sometimes. So that's something which I heard from the developers a lot. That why do I need to declare every time? It should be in the backend when I'm performing or basically initializing a state. So that is something which we can improve. And these are the small things that when improved will improve the overall developer experience, I guess.
All right, so last question. What would you like to see happen in 2025?
Yeah, so I would love to see a breakout application in FHE. I think that's something which happened in ZK as well, and that will, make the space more aware what the tech is capable of doing, and hopefully a very simple one it can be. Like we can have a payment application which uses FHE at the backend, and yeah, so because payment is like one of the biggest use case which the entire crypto industry has, and private payments is still not solved right now. And like as you mentioned, like confidential ERC20 is the first step towards that. And so yeah, would love to see that happening, and hopeful for that.
Yeah, I'd like to find a girlfriend, but I would settle for maybe some of the FHE networks finally going live. So that'd be great to see. I think it'll be interesting, especially with like the hardware integration, potentially seeing new schemes being integrated, deployment of different, applications of like different threshold decryption. I think it's a really exciting space. Like, I think 2024 was a lot of putting in the groundwork, and then 2025 we'll see a lot of these pieces come together. I do think that one of the things with it's like kind of tricky trying to get people to like build with FHE in some aspects. I don't know if you guys have found this, but a lot of people, you want to make a bag in crypto, and like there's not really been like a successful case of someone deploying like a ZK NFT project for something and then cashing out. So once I think people can see a few winners make a bag, and then they'll be like, oh shit, jump on that. In terms of like applications, I mean, me personally, I'd like to see some sort of like, I don't know, like FHE OnlyFans or like dating or something. It could be interesting. People put like sensitive information that they normally wouldn't put. Things that you might not want shared on your dating profile or preferences. I'd give examples, but that'd be weird. But yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, on my end, I think very similar to, I would say, what you said, which is I think payment is an unsolved problem. I'll be really happy to see people truly adopting some kind of confidential payments for little things like payroll or B2B payments. And yeah, I'll be really happy if I start seeing some kind of real traction on that. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. It was great chatting with both of you. Yep, and thank you everyone for coming.